we are on Zoom tonight, so I must do my obligatory anyone on Zoom type thing. That's my question, so, yeah. Okay. Oh, perfect. And I will direct my question to you. So. Oh, we're there. Are we already?
It's only 5:59.
Sorry.
Don't jump the gun.
Sorry. And is our technician okay? Do you know? We're all good? And our city manager's here, so we're all good. And so we're migrating to the other side. Okay.
But you're on the bride's side?
It looks like the bride's side and the
I love
queen's
it.
side, you know, like this.
Okay, Bill? We good? Good. Good evening. Welcome to the October 20th public hearing, actually Planning Commission meeting for the city of Sonoma. At this point, I'd love to have a roll call.
Commissioner Barbos,
Here.
Commissioner McDonald,
Here.
Commissioner O'Neill,
Here.
Commissioner Willers,
Here.
Vice Chair Barnett,
Here.
and Chair Wellender.
Here.
Thank you.
So at this point, we'll go ahead and have the Pledge of Allegiance, and I would like to ask the attending candidate for City Council to lead us in our pledge. You can go wherever you want. It's fine.
Very good. I pledge allegiance to the flag, to the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, for liberty and justice for all. I missed one word.
Okay. Thank you, Patricia. Well, before we move on to the section where the public can comment on items not appearing on the agenda, I'd like to interrupt that and give our current planning director the opportunity to make an introduction, or our interim city manager to make an introduction that may have an impact on us.
Great, so I just wanted to introduce Laura Simpson. She's going to be our interim planning director, and I sent you all her background in an email. I hope you all got it, and we're really excited to have her here. She has quite an extensive background in planning, and this is a sad kind of moment too, because it's not a moment yet, but we're going to be, David's going to be leaving us, and I have to say that since I took over as interim city manager, I've learned an extensive amount about planning, probably more than I ever wanted to know, but it's great. So now I know a lot of the initials that you use. I can sort of understand that, and last night we had a planning item, and there was a lot of initials. I'm like, I understand what she's talking about. So, but it's been great to work with David, and he's given me so much knowledge in the past couple of months. So anyway, we're excited to have him.
Thank you. Well, welcome. I must warn you, you have a motley crew up here you're going to have to put up with. And I would be careful who you're learning from to the person on your left. So anyway, so welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
So now with that formal behind us, let's move on to the items, giving the audience an opportunity, or the public, to speak on items that are not appearing on the agenda. Please state your name.
Matt Metzler. Hello, Planning Commissioners. I'm here tonight to talk to you about the lack of affordable housing for those of us who work in Sonoma. Where I live at Friar Creek Drive and Newcomb Streets is a wonderful neighborhood. It's only a mile from the plaza. It's close to schools, parks, and bike paths. And it's been a great place to raise my kids. About 25 years ago, when they built some houses, including mine, in order to meet the affordable housing quota, the builder was required to build one smaller house, which is the house next door to mine. This house is on a much smaller lot than the others that they built, and was granted an easement on the setback requirements so that the house's garage wall is right on the property line with 0 setback. Now, I'm glad the city of Sonoma required that this one smaller house be built to at least provide some affordable housing. However, when this house went on the market, it was bought by someone who already owns another home in town. And the house has not been lived in since it was sold in January, and the new owners have spent the last 9 months on extensive remodeling and upgrades. In addition, the house next door to me on the other side is also a second home. And the owners have only been there like 1 weekend a month for like the last 20 years. So these are some examples of how the housing stock in Sonoma is reduced by being bought by second homeowners who do not live, work, or raise their kids in our town. So I would like the city to explore ways to use property taxes to help with this problem. Perhaps a 2-tier tax system could be implemented with one tax rate for full-time residents and a higher tax rate for second homeowners. From the amount that the new owners of the house next door to me have spent on remodeling a vacant house, I think they can afford higher taxes. I think that this is only fair as I have the disadvantage of not having a setback between me and the house next door to me, but there's no benefit of seeing it on the market for a local worker as an affordable starter home. And I don't know if this smaller house with a 0 setback was deed restricted when built, and perhaps the moderate income deed restriction has expired because it's been more than 20 years. So I'd like to see the city place a longer period of deed restriction on all the lower moderate income housing that it requires to be built. And I know that imposing a property tax surcharge on second homes in Sonoma would be very difficult to administer and would present huge legal challenges. However, I think that exploring this way of assuring that housing for those who work here and to keep our housing from being used up as second homes is something worth looking into. I've read that Oakland, Paris, and Vancouver have implemented this kind of vacancy tax. People love to come to Sonoma for the great food and wine. I urge you to do everything you can to make sure that Sonoma housing is available to folks who work at Sonoma wineries and restaurants and schools and retail businesses. There's plenty of lodgings for visitors to come to Sonoma, and I don't think they should be using up our housing for second homes. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Anyone else would like to come forward and speak to an item not appearing on the agenda? Okay, seeing no movement, we're
We've
just
got a
going to...
couple members of the public on Zoom that would like to speak.
Please.
Mitch Vincent Guerra would like to speak. Go ahead, Mitch.
Good evening. My name is Mitchell Vincent-Guerra, and I'm a field representative for Carpenters Local 751 here in Sonoma County. I am here tonight to request the Planning Commission adopt labor standards. I hope you consider developing labor standards that include healthcare and apprenticeships. 1 out of 4, or 26% of construction workers in California lack health insurance. That's 2.5 times the rate for all California workers. These workers are sometimes reliant on emergency rooms, taxing an already overburdened medical system in our community. Policies that require contractors to offer their workers' families health care will raise standards in the construction industry while also ensuring that employers who do offer health care can compete on a level playing field. Because of increased wages and lack of student debt, construction apprenticeship can be a better option for many young people than traditional undergraduate programs. Construction apprenticeship programs are a proven escalator to the middle class, training tens of thousands of construction workers every year at no cost to taxpayers, and policies that require the utilization of apprenticeships develop a pool of skilled labor in the local area who can work on future projects. We at NorCal Carpenters look forward to having a detailed conversation with each of you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mitch.
Yes, Steve Harris would like to speak. Go ahead, Steve. Steve, you'll need to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Steve Harris. I am a field representative from NorCal Carpenters Union, Local 751, right here in Santa Rosa. And I am speaking here today to talk to you about ensuring the future of our construction industry and your community. We can do that by ensuring responsible developers and contractors not only paying living wages, but also provide health care, apprenticeship programs, and hire locally. Without these standards, the men and women of our communities cannot afford the basic things in life, the medical needs of their families, and spend too much time in other areas for work, rather than with their loved ones. We, as a community, need to make sure to build the workforce of tomorrow. I look forward to continuing this conversation with each and every one of you, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Steve.
No more comments on Zoom.
Very good.
Mr. Chair, may I
Please.
say something? I just want to take this moment to thank the speakers for speaking, but to also bring to your attention that the role of the Planning Commission is to administer the rules and regulations of the Development Code. We don't make the law, we just determine what compliance with the law is. The comments that have been made by the public so far tonight, with which any one of us up here may or may not have strong agreement, is actually a matter of law, and I would suggest that rather than addressing your comments to any of us individually or reaching out to any of us individually, your time would be better spent reaching out to the existing city council and the city council that will be sitting after the election in November, because that's the body which can address the concerns that you have raised tonight, not the Planning Commission. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to review and accept the agenda. Do I have any thoughts, comments about acceptance or exceptions?
I make a motion that we accept the agenda.
Second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Barbos,
Yes.
Commissioner McDonald,
Yes.
Commissioner O'Neill,
Yes.
Commissioner Willers,
Yes.
Vice Chair Barnett,
Aye.
and Chair Wellender.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes unanimously.
All right. Moving quickly on to item number 5, which is correspondence. Do we have any correspondence or update on the correspondence?
No late correspondence was received.
Great, thank you. Consent calendar. We have some past meeting notes. Do we want to keep them on the consent, or is there an issue that we need to pull off and discuss? Seeing none.
Mr. Chair, I would have to recuse myself from the vote on the 8:18 minutes as I was not in attendance.
Thank you.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Barbos,
Yes.
Commissioner McDonald,
Yes.
Commissioner O'Neill,
Yes.
Commissioner Willers,
Yes.
Vice Chair Barnett,
I was not in attendance.
and Chair Wellender.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes.
Okay, now we're going to segue right into the public hearing, for which we do have a short agenda this evening. We'll begin with item 7.1, which is to discuss and consider and take possible action to approve an exception application regarding a pool. So at this point, I'd like to ask staff to give us a report, please.
Thank you, Chair Wellender and Planning Commissioners. This is an exception application of Elizabeth Claroux to allow a pool to be located 4 feet from the side property line, located at 473 4th Street East. The project is located near the intersection of 4th Street East and East Napa. The property is in the northeast area. It's zoned low-density residential, and the property is located in the historic overlay zone. As I mentioned, the property is designated low-density residential, and this designation is intended primarily for single-family housing and duplexes with attached or clustered development allowed by use permit. The project involves constructing a new 167 square foot pool. The pool would be located on the north side of the property, set back 4 feet from the side, which is the north property, and 33 feet from the south property line. Pools are allowed by right, provided they meet the setback requirements. Swimming pools and spas are allowed in side and rear setbacks, provided they're no closer than 5 feet to the property lines. The applicant is requesting an exception to allow the pool to be located 4 feet from the north property line. The property itself is non-conforming in terms of size and width. The lot size is just under 5,000 square feet, and the lot size requirement in the zoning district is 7,500 square feet, and the lot width is 49 feet, and the lot width requirement in this zone is 65 feet. In front of you are the use permit findings. The first one is the adjustment authorized by the exception is consistent with the general plan and the overall objectives of the development code. And the project is zoned low density residential, which allows the proposed pool. And the project proposes residential development on a site designated by the general plan as residential and at a density that complies with the zoning district. 2, the exception to the normal standards of the development code is justified by environmental features or site conditions, and the project is constrained by the existing site conditions, which I previously mentioned. The parcel is not conforming in terms of lot width and lot size. And 3, granting the exception will not be detrimental to the public health, safety, or welfare. And regards to compatibility with the neighboring properties, the property on the north could be impacted. The visual impacts of the placement of the pool need to be considered. And it should be noted that that we have received correspondence from the neighbor from the north indicating that they support the proposed project. So staff recommends that the Planning Commission approve a resolution authorizing the exception subject to findings and conditions of approval. And that concludes staff's report. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone have questions for staff? Mr. Willers?
It's just a minor item, but condition number 4 of the project approval is totally unclear to me. Maybe it's just a typo or a switching of words or something, but it says that the inside of the pool shall be located not less than 6 feet horizontally from the inside wall of the pool.
Oh, that was a condition that was sent to me by the building department. So I'll make sure
So
that
I'm
is.
just asking for for you to seek clarification
I will.
of that.
Thank you for that.
Any other? Yes, Mr. McDonald.
I have a question for our staff. I'm sure you probably already looked at this, but did you get a title report, a current title report to review any sort of easements? I just wanted to make sure that the pool, since a lot of times the side yard setbacks and rear yard setbacks have easements in them, so I would think that if you haven't, you can maybe add a condition that requires a current title report and that it clears any sort of easements, or so it doesn't have any issues with respect to public safety or granting easements.
Yeah, typically, that's not a condition of approval that the Planning Commission offers. I'm not aware of any easements on the side yard property line, but if that is a condition that the whole of the commission want to add, we can look at that.
We could certainly add something to investigate whether there is an impediment, if you will, to the placement of the structure, and we could certainly determine that through a PTR of some kind. We can also hear from the applicant too. I'm sure they don't want to put a pool in a place where it's not going to be allowed.
There's 2 things that you should look at when you look at pools. One is easements, and 2 is our overhead lines, and I'm assuming those both have been looked at. Thanks.
Mr. Barbos?
Well, I kind of hate to see the applicant have to go to any extra expense to get another title report. So I'm sure she got one when she bought her house. I'm sure she has a policy of title insurance that she got when she bought her house. Any of those things that you're mentioning would show up on those things. So I think she could just simply make that available for staff review to confirm that, and that would be my suggestion for that condition, that staff confirm with her existing policy that there's no easement or other impediment of record that would interfere with this.
What additional comment on that, because Elizabeth allowed me to come visit the site yesterday, is that the side edge of the pool is not extending beyond the side of the structure in the back. So if there was an easement, it's already been identified.
Okay, very good. I'd like to invite the applicant, if she would like to come forward to the podium and speak, and start, please, with identifying who you are.
Sure. My name is Elizabeth Claroux, homeowner of the 473 Street or 4th Street East property with the pool. There's no easement on that side. There is an easement on the back of the property, but not near where the pool is. And I can provide the title documents from when I purchased the property, that type of thing, and that's where it does stipulate where the easements are. I also had, before doing the construction, I went out to Adobe Associates and had a survey done so that I could just ensure all the lines of the property, since it's such an old property and those kind of things didn't really exist back in 1930. So I have that as well that I could provide, and that would give you that information, I would think, as well. And that was another expensive item, so if that would suffice in this case, that I think is on file with the property right now, because I have a construction project going on, a garage and a studio and things like that, and so the survey, I think, was submitted with all that documentation. So it's actually already with you guys, so if that would suffice, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I don't think we need a condition of approval. I think the message has been sent. We can just clarify that as we go through the building permit process.
Agreed.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, then I'd like to open it up to the public if anyone wishes to step forward and speak on this item, and if so, begin by identifying yourself. So was there a reason everybody sat on that side away from this poor lonely applicant? So, seeing no movement coming forward, I'm going to close the public portion of this item and bring it back to the commission for discussion and possible action. Mr. Barbos.
Given the abnormally small lot size in question, I think that the exception is appropriate and doesn't seem to have any detrimental effect on the neighbor who's apparently consented. So I'm completely in favor of this proposal.
I would agree with that, and I think that it fits the site well. I think it's going to enhance that property, and it's not impacting the neighbor. Plus, during times of fire, don't we all want reservoirs of water nearby?
Okay, anything else? May I hear a motion?
Okay, I make a motion that we approve the resolution authorizing the exception, subject to the findings and conditions of approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Further discussion? Roll call, please.
Commissioner Barbos,
Yes.
Commissioner McDonald,
Yes.
Commissioner O'Neill,
Yes.
Commissioner Willers,
Yes.
Vice Chair Barnett,
Aye.
Chair Wellender.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes unanimously.
Congratulations, and just one sidebar comment. Thank you for taking forth the effort of contacting the neighbor. It always brings credence to a presentation knowing that you had put forth effort to reach out to your neighbors, so thank you.
Thank you so much.
So, moving along. I do believe our next item, 7.2, is going to be continued. Would our planning director like to just comment before anything on that?
We just have additional work to do, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. So,
We would like a motion for you to continue it.
well then, I will look to my fellow compadres.
Do we have a date when we're going to continue it to?
Uncertain.
Off calendar, I believe.
Yeah, I make a motion that we continue item 7.2 to date uncertain.
Second.
Discussion? Roll call, please.
Commissioner Barbos?
Yes.
Commissioner McDonald?
Yes.
Commissioner O'Neill?
Yes.
Commissioner Willers?
Yes.
Vice Chair Barnett?
Aye.
Chair Wellender?
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes unanimously.
All right. We have an odd item coming up. Items for discussion. That's what number 8 says. Is it early, late? We switch it with item number 9 for.
It's kind of like the seventh inning stretch.
Okay, so now that we've addressed that, no discussion. We're going to move right into 9.1, a much waited for, and that's an update on the Municipal Services Review, the MSR, and would love to open it up to our director, please.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. I have a 4-hour PowerPoint presentation for you tonight, so we'll get started right along. The reason we're here tonight is because very recently, September the 7th, the Sonoma County Local Agency Formation Commission adopted a municipal services review for the city of Sonoma. The last one we had for our community was in 2006. That being said, that particular review, oh, by the way, whenever there's an activity or something that precipitates a need to amend boundaries, LAFCOs are supposed to do a study, and generally, for the most part, that's every 5 years, per the legislation under the Cortese-Knox-Hertzberg law that became effective in the year 2000. With the application that came our way on the Doyle property, that gave me the ability to raise the question at LAFCO, and they agreed, concurred, and began the process to hire a consultant to prepare our MSR. The MSR in 2006 is basically done by an independent third party, if you will, a contractor, who looks at the services that a municipality provides: sewer, water, police, fire, you name it, planning. They get into budget. And in 2006, a reputable company did that MSR and came up with 23 determinations, or findings of fact, if you will, telling us what we do and how we do it. And there were no recommendations. So in the 2022 MSR for our community, there were 43 determinations, statements of fact, findings, if you will, and then also there were 4 particular and specific recommendations that we as our community should take a look at. And I thought it appropriate, shortly after the adoption of that document, that the City Council be made aware that there is this product out there that talks about the community that we have and the services that we provide. The purpose of a municipal services report is to look at the effectiveness of our services, efficiencies, and the like, not just a matter of telling us what time it is on our watch. The point being looking forward with an eye toward the future, opportunities where we can consolidate. A local formation commission basically has the responsibility to create special districts like sewer, water, mosquito abatement districts, the like. And it also has the ability to approve annexations, incorporations, and dissolutions. And without going into the government code, the Cortese-Knox-Hertzberg law was relatively new as of 2000. Prior to that, it had been hodgepodge since 1963 when the basic Cortese-Knox law came into law. So basically, as I just said, talk about boundary changes, creating new agencies and the like, and also approving extensions outside of service boundaries. And a couple of our former city council members may have even been on council when outside service agreements were actually approved over on the east side around the Thornsbury area. The legislative direction is to promote orderly growth and discourage urban sprawl, and that's why we have these things that you've heard of called an SOI, a sphere of influence. And the goal is to preserve open space and prime ag lands, and again, to provide efficient governmental services. Our current commission members, you'll see there, is made up of 7 people. You can see that between the cities we share representation. We also have 2 supervisors and 2 special districts. In this case, we've got a fire district and a water district, and 1 member of the public that provides services to LAFCO. And as a rule, they generally meet once a month, usually the first Wednesday of each month. Within the MSR that we've received, we talk about such wonderful things like growth and population, present and future services, capacity, and obviously the ability of a government to finance the services that it has. We are indeed unique in that we have contract service for a lot of work, and inside the MSR you'll see a discussion about those specific services when it comes to sewer and water in particular. And you'll see throughout the MSR that we have questions about whether it is or is not efficient, the services that we do provide. Some of the 43 determinations are interesting. I've just provided a couple here. One talks about our aging population, and these are just findings of fact. Some are supported, some are not supported with any data, with data sources in the MSR. I'm a demographic nerd, but obviously the last couple of years we've had a decline in population. The numbers aren't massive one way or the other, but it is a recognized decline in our population. We find out what our population is as of January of each year in May. And the Department of Finance will give us that number. But the last 2 years we have been declining in population ever so slightly. There are 4 recommendations, and tonight the purpose of bringing these to your attention, as with the council, is not necessarily to solve them tonight or provide recommendations from your commission tonight to the city council. That's a discussion we can have either tonight or direction for the future, because as we've said earlier, there's going to be an election coming up with new council members and new planning commissioners. But it is the role of the planning commission to look at these issues and provide recommendations, and that's the expectation of the city council, that your commission will actually do that at some point in the future. I thought it important to get this to you tonight to review because of the timeliness of the release of the report, rather than waiting from September until after a new city council is installed. I think it's a very important message to send to our community, and especially with respect to these 4 recommendations. So as I just synthesize what they say, you can see that the first recommendation from LAFCO is to continue on with discussions that have commenced with the county regarding local public services, and in order to provide improvements in effectiveness and efficiencies. And those discussions have occurred at the city manager, board of supervisors, conversations with senior staff members, I'm going to say over the last year and a half, not necessarily moving at glacier pace, but those discussions are being conducted. I'm not going to say that the primary topic of conversation is the Springs, but that certainly has come up about governance within that area. And also at the city council, that question came up at the meeting that we had, not last night, but the one before, I believe, when I made the presentation initially, where questions were presented about whether there's a desire of people within the Springs, and then where is the Springs relative to the specific plan that the county is in the process of doing in the IR and specific plan for. The second recommendation that you see here is talking about whether we need to modify our sphere of influence with respect to Montini Preserve and Maxwell Farms at the park, and whether or not we want to leave things as they are or not. So there's LAFCO saying we should take a look at those particular pieces of property outside of our city limits, but very close to our city limits. The third one talks about possible annexations in the Denmark Street area on 5th Street East. the Four Corners, which is obviously to the south end of town on Broadway, on either side of Broadway, south of Napa Road and Leveroni, and also the Harrington Drive areas where you have 20 or 30 separate lots that are not currently served by sewer. I believe they are by water. But regarding the city's intention as far as possible annexation areas, we've had some interest, more so along Denmark and also on the Four Corners area south. You may recall that the council had a very brief discussion one evening about the Zapponi Serafini site, which is about 5 acres on the east side, south of Napa and east of Broadway. But that did not amount to anything. There's has been interest not only in that parcel being annexed to the city. I'd also venture to say that we should bring the 2.5 acres to the south of it, and also the parcels on the west side of Broadway, south of Leveroni, behind to the south of Broadway Market. There are 4 1-acre parcels there owned by Mr. Merlot, who has expressed an interest of annexation at some point in the future. The last recommendation revolves around discussions with the Traintown property, which is a 10-acre piece of property that is wholly incorporated, surrounded by our city limits, and that there would be a process within Cortese and Eltzbergsburg to have that annexed to the city consistent with state law, and also in tandem with a master property tax agreement that there's an agreement between the communities of Sonoma County and the cities of Sonoma County. And just doing a little bit of geography here, you see the lighter yellow areas there to the top, to the west of the cemetery. You'll see the Montini Preserve. You can also see the park site to the very far west of the city in the lighter yellow, and then down to the south you can see the it's a little bit milky, I think, the legend there, but you can see the urban growth boundary, for the most part coterminous with the urban growth boundary and the city limit line, or the sphere of influence, if you will. So those areas in the light yellow are those that are inside the UGB but outside of the sphere of influence. And obviously the darker yellow, if you will, is our city limits. I've done this drawing, excuse me. I prepared this diagram here just to give us an order of magnitude as far as acreage. As I mentioned just a minute ago, for area number 7, you can see that that's about a 10-acre site. So you can kind of appreciate the magnitude of the properties that we're talking about here, and their total about 245 acres. And here I've sliced them up so you can kind of see where the actual parcels are. The one to the very far right on the top line there is the Denmark area, and you can see in the dark blue that's the urban growth boundary. So these properties, while surrounded on 3 sides, are not in the city limits, and there has been development out there on some of those properties. The recommendation that made to council was that the Planning Commission review the 4 recommendations at some point in concert with the new city manager and a new department head at some point in the first quarter of next year, and those recommendations can be to determine how to implement the recommendations if there's a desire to do so, and also modify the sphere of influence. Again, some of the topics for you to look at are potential annexations of the park areas, Traintown, Denmark, or in general, whether there needs to be efficiencies with respect to providing sewer, water, or any kind of other municipal facility. At this point, staff's going to try to answer questions if you have them, and be happy to open up the item to the members of the public. Thank you.
Thank you, David. One of my questions has to do with a component of the current UGB, which requires that parcels currently not included within the UGB, if I believe I've got it correctly, that are annexed for inclusion in the UGB need to be developed with 100% affordable housing if developed. I can't off my head identify which parcels that you've shown on this map that would fit that criteria, but I'm certain there are some. Certainly Harrington, that whole area would be impacted by the language of the UGB measure. Can you speak a bit as to how we work out that issue?
Well, at the moment, I don't have my UGB language, and I haven't got it memorized, so I'll apologize ahead of time. But clearly that's some of the stuff that we need to look at as to whether the SOI needs to be modified to include that. So there's you may be in the SOI and inside the UGB, but they're not coterminous in some locations, so that would be a place for us to match those up.
Okay, and upon matching them up, I still don't know if that's going to conform with the language in the UGB, which was an initiative process placed on the ballot, approved by the voters, and it will be interesting to get the legal analysis as to whether or not an adjustment of that language in any way has to also be approved by the voters.
So when it comes to, let's just talk for kicks and giggles about the word annexation. We're not compelled to do anything with the recommendations from the MSR. We can just let things stay as they are. The goal, I think, is to promote orderly growth and development. And in this particular case, those areas that are identified here, I'll see if I can get the map. There we go. Let's go down to the bottom line to the far left. You can see there, for example, that's the 3-acre Doyle property on the corner of 5th. That is not in the city limits. It's inside the SOI, and it's inside the UGB. A great place to do development. That's the whole concept of what LAFCO does. So they would support this annexation for housing, ostensibly. And you see that little parcel to the east, to the west of it. It's about 0.6 of an acre. I didn't know that wasn't in the city limits, but it isn't. And we've got some other little oddities like that. But however, most of them are larger. And as you look at the Montini Preserve, that's not in our city limits, but it's outside the UGB. So if for some wacky reason it was as flat as a pancake and we could put housing there, we couldn't do it because it's outside the UGB for the reasons that you just mentioned. So when there's direction from our city council to annex land to our city limits, we have to look at the UGB language. We have to look at amending the SOI. And those actions will come by resolution from the council, go through your planning commission, go to the council, and then direction will be given to then petition LAFCO for annexation. And we're more than likely not going to do that until there's a day when somebody comes knocking on our door to want to do development, to build housing. And especially under the scenario that you mentioned, Vice Chair, that if it's 100% housing, there's going to be a desire on our part to do that.
Thank you.
Sheila.
I need your help here because I'm not knowledgeable on this. But there's some people who obviously there's benefits to being annexed to the city and other people who clearly do not want that. What are the trade-offs? And if we are going to annex an area, how do we make it a win-win?
So there's a couple of ways to get to LAFCO. Ultimately, you've got to get to LAFCO to approve an annexation, incorporation, dissolution, whatever, creation of a new city. There has to be a desire from the masses, so to speak. In the case of a developer, they could theoretically petition LAFCO directly. They're generally not going to do that. So in the case of Doyle, if you recall, they came knocking on our door with a general plan request, a designation, a pre-zoning, if you will. We didn't get down that process on that project. The process there would have been the property owner came, in that case, the potential purchaser, probably had it under contract, basically said, we want to come in. You generally don't like a situation where you bring somebody in against their will. However, in the case of a train town, this is an example, you may have a property owner that doesn't want to annex, but there's specific statutory language that says, hey, that's an island, you should bring that in, and there's an expedited process to do that. There's always a process for a property owner, such as a train town or the Doyle or any other property owner, to protest in that process as it goes forward in LAFCO. And they have rights in which to appeal the decision or fight, if you will, maybe a resolution from the city council that says, go annex, Mr. Storer, and go that process.
But more specifically for the property owner, are there increased assessments when they're within the city limits?
The answer could be yes, and it could be no. Yeah. So in the case of property owners, their taxes will shift. They still pay, but they pay to a different entity. There may be a reduction in account. Like for example, if you're in the county, you may be paying a tax, a countywide tax that's not applicable inside the city limits, and vice versa. So there has to be a fiscal analysis along with an application as it moves its way through. And you can be sure that the county, as in most counties, are loath to give up the property tax revenue without coming up with a tax sharing agreement where they probably get 50% or however it's negotiated So that there's a trade-off there, for example. In the case of most applicants that petition for annexation, they want improved services. They want the police response times to be better. They want better fire flow, pressure, water, you name it, whatever government services it is. But generally, it depends on the individual property as to what property tax benefits there are.
So right now, since we contract our police from the sheriff department, there's really no, is there any difference in somebody calling 911 and getting the police?
I'd like to think they get better service when they call the city of Sonoma's fire department or police department. But we know that they're the same, they're one and the same.
Any more questions? Bill?
So David, in the case of Maxwell and the Montini Preserve, what is the benefit in the current situation to those areas being brought into the city limits? What's the benefit for the city?
I actually don't know what the benefit would be, and the same, and that's the whole point of doing the analysis, is to figure out what is the benefit and where is the efficiency. And in the case of the Springs, clearly if the city annexed up Highway 12, we get the sales tax revenue. And if we didn't do any commercial annexation and we only got the residential side, that's going to be a loser for our city because of the cost of providing services to those homes. And so that's the whole point of a fiscal impact study that goes along with the annexation request.
And I see, it's interesting because LAFCO makes these recommendations, but at the same time, the Montini Preserve is a preserve. Essentially, it has language around it protecting it as open space. The Maxwell Park, I believe, was given to the county as a park by the landowner. So it has stipulations on its title. So, LAFCO's saying, well, bring those in. I look at it and say, why?
I'm going to split a hair with you. In that they didn't
Microphone.
Sorry, thank you. Splitting the hair with you is that they didn't actually say bring it in, they said think about it.
Think about it.
And it's not a long thinker if you ask me about it, to be honest with you. But
Yeah.
clearly there would need to be some, you don't want to annex property that's going to be a drain on your current customers and your current population. Why do that? And that's partly the rub.
And then extending services in the Denmark area, the majority of those properties in the Denmark section that LAFCO's identifying have just recently been improved. There's no opportunity for improvement. They're obviously, they're on septic, but they're on water. I guess there's tax benefit to the city ultimately. But from a municipality service standpoint, those properties are primarily they've just been improved essentially. I know that the Denmark area, those people that own those properties that see themselves as being in the county, have over time expressed their opinion about joining our community.
Yeah, and you can see, if you look on the top right there on the top row, the three large parcels that are together there, those are the ones that you're referring to. And I was approached within my first 6 months about the timing of the subdivision of those properties relative to the provision of water and sewer to our city, and there was no appetite to have just those three annexed. Why? You're making a worse island, if you will, which is antithesis to what LAFCO's policies are all about.
Thank you.
Any questions, Bob? No. Excuse me. I've got a couple questions. Starting off at the very beginning, just curious, you said that this MSR typically happens every 5 years, and so we're 13 years late. Who initiates the request? Is that something that we, the city, have to beg LAFCO to put it up, the money, and pursue it?
Yeah, in this particular case, I could have picked up the call and called Mr. Brownfit and say, please do an MSR, at which point he'd say, I generally don't want to do that unless you're thinking about seriously modifying your SOI, in which case that's what Mark said. With the advent of the Doyle application, it was game over at that point, and Mr. Bramfitt was willing to fund an MSR to the tune of, I think, around $25,000. And it took about 8 months to prepare.
So it's not a case where it's done every 5 years just on any consecutive basis. It's just when there's an interest in either annexation or expanding?
That, I would say if you go through the 58 LAFCOs, I think that's about the number of counties matching I would say 85% of the executive officers would take that position, but they really should be doing them every 5 years to keep them fresh and accurate.
Okay. My next question has to do with the, there was some discussion in the past about the annexation of Four Corners, and that when we first got our increased RENA numbers, as well as the county got their RENA numbers, there was great, I guess, mutual interest as to the potential of Four Corners. Is the county currently grabbing that space and saying, we want that to meet our RENA numbers, and that can't be developed until we offer them up water service?
Yeah, there's two pieces there. I'll try to address it. That's already in the county, in the unincorporated county. It's
Right.
their numbers. So, for example, I'll just give you the 4 1-acre properties.
Merlot?
The Merlot sites, they're popped out in the arena at 20 units to the acre. On the opposite side of the road, that's 20 units to the acre of 5 acres, so they're getting 100 units there. When those annex to our city, we then have this ability to trade some of those numbers if it happens during the next 8-year cycle that we'll be under.
So that means if we annex that, then we don't get the full 180 units?
We would negotiate with the county about how that's going to happen, yes.
Okay.
It's a ledger thing, a ledger as to who gets the credit for those particular. If we're providing the service, then there's a strong argument that they should be counting towards our arena.
Okay. I think that's it. So if we have no further questions up at the commission for staff, I'd like to then open it up for the public to come forward and offer comments, questions. Simply state your name. Break the ice there, Mr. Frank.
Good evening, everyone. Mr. Barnett, we meet again.
It's been a few years.
Last time we did so was in 1999, 23 years ago this very month.
Louis Ramponi was on the council.
Yes, indeed, yes. History rhymes. Doesn't necessarily repeat, but it does rhyme. Here we go again. Robert Frank, Larkin Drive. And if you recall, Mr. Barnett, in 1999, I offered an outside service agreement. And LAFCO, only in July, highly dissuaded me from that notion. He said, no, we can't do that, that the outside service agreement does not allow a tax split down for the fire department. That was the whole premise for the urging of our annexation, is for fire protection. And so anyway, fortunately we have good legal counsel who said, in the California Code Book, Code 56134, again, 56134, specifically allows for a tax split down for fire protection. And then as far as all the other services go, sewage, water, et cetera, fire, police, redundant, police, et cetera, is Code 56133 for everything else. So I want us all to be witnesses here that we are yet again suggesting that we provide extra taxes, extra property taxes, in addition to the normal county taxes we already pay, for a so-called OSA, outside service agreement, under provisions California Code 56133, 56134. All this was done in the witness of Stu Gorn. Unfortunately, I had this information. I don't know if I was misled by the LAFCO commissioner or I was lied to by omission. I'm not sure. But an excuse, ruse, and alibi to annex us only several months ago was our so-called parking problem down there. And I have to repeat, like a bad TV commercial, again and again and again, that these were our parking problems. 3 separate categories were government-induced. These letters to the editor, Trantown is compounding out of control, and other such nonsense. This whole notion that our alignment in taxation should be with the city because we rely on city roads. Again, misinformational. Broadway, aka Highway 12, is maintained by the state, right down to the chuck holes in the asphalt. Watma, another tributary road of ours, is county maintained, as is Napa Road. So our tax allegiance alignment is better with the county and the state than it is the city. Because since 1960, we have provided all our own water, drainage, sewage. We have not made an emergency telephone call to our fire department since 1960, because I like to think we're that well managed. We haven't even made a call to the police department or the sheriff's department in a good several decades, because, we have good surveillance equipment. We just, we are very proactive in the day-to-day management of that operation. And I'd like to also, Mr. Barnett, the first time we resisted annexation, LAFCO urged annexation, was in 1993, again in 1999, and again now. Had we not resisted that LAFCO urged annexation those 29 and 23 years ago, Traintown would be a double, if not quadruple, row of condos. And I'm not exaggerating that. Instead, we remain Traintown, which is nothing less than 500,000 square feet of maintenance, nightmare, and hell. And that's why I can't hear in one ear and deaf in the other. And I'm telling you right now, it was no fun sitting there and not being able to hear what this fine gentleman said. I said, what did he say? And the problem with hearing aids, in my case, it just magnifies the distortion. That's the type, because of my nerve loss damage. We have one of the best machine shops in the county. We have 4 chainsaws in order to maintain our 2,000 trees. So anyway, all I can say is that out of all that toil, we consistently rank as one of the top 15 attractions, not only in the valley here, but also in the county at large. 7 or 8 of those are public attractions, like Jack London Wolf House, the Mission, General Vallejo's home. The other 7 or 8 are privately owned, like Traintown, Beyonce, Buena Vista. And the 7 or 8 privately owned attractions have one thing in common, that none of us are within the incorporated limits of any city in this county. Now think about that. We need, and Mr. Wallander, you would appreciate this point, as 500,000 square feet of living, breathing, outdoor artwork, we have to have our 6 degrees of elbow room. Is this fair? You should know this as well as me, if not better. Anyway, it's our feeling, our really sincere feeling, that outdoor works of art, such as a well-groomed winery or our operation, really can't coexist long-term in a tourism NIMBY, straight-jacketed city political environment long-term. Long-term. We've been there 62 years. We'd like to be there another 62 years. Traintown is owned by 8 direct descendants of my father, Stanley Frank, who is buried 660 paces from here. I walked them myself, 660 paces. We have the 3rd generation member right here, Monica, who heads up part of our operation. Right here, Monica, say hello. Thank you. It was suggested by our legal counsel and a certain city staffer in this very room, I will allow his or her privacy, not to waste time with a lame duck, I don't like the word lame duck, planning commission. I don't subscribe to that advice, because even though some of you might be gone, your influence will continue to live on. And that's why I'm speaking today against that advice otherwise. I beg your reconsideration, because it's not you I fear, it's your successors and your successors' successors and the political residue they leave behind. And also I wanted to say, Mr. Waller, that debate, I wasn't here because our oldest daughter was getting married, so I wasn't able to attend the debate function. But I really liked your comment about the middle class. That's ignored relative to buying a house. That is just an outstanding point. Because, in this day and age, you could have the husband make 100 and some thousand, the wife make 100 and some thousand, the combined $250,000 still won't buy you a basic 3-bedroom, 2-bath, stucco and plywood clad 2x4 stick house. And there is just, so here's the thing, and I was thinking, should I say something at the very, very beginning? Because again, as a landscape architect, there's something in our community that's also world class, tremendously world class. Nobody ever talks about it, good or bad, but it is an amazing complex. And that's the mobile home park at the end of MacArthur, west end of MacArthur, otherwise known as Moon Valley. It was already established in the early 60s. It has stood the test of time. And if we were, the thing about these big 5- and 6-story human block storage facilities like they're building up and down Santa Rosa Avenue, they have the potential, a real potential of being tomorrow's slums. The point that you were trying to make, I think, was how do you allow new homeowners a stepping stone opportunity to go from a small, inexpensive dwelling to a more expensive dwelling? One of the ways that could be possible is to sell divisible interests in a mobile home park, nicely landscaped. In fact, I'd rather live there, and I hope I'm not offending anyone, I'd rather live at Moon Valley than any of those neighborhoods, any of those streets that surround the local hospital. Might you? I mean, it's just a beautiful operation. It checks the box on so many things.
I'm not going to cut you off. I want to recognize that for just reasons, I've given you well over 3 minutes, and I appreciate your passion. I appreciate everything that you've shared. I want you to continue. And this won't be the last time that the topic of annexation is going to be coming up as a whole.
Indeed.
So 5 minutes, if you can.
Well, thank you. I don't like, having to deal with this. I really don't. I have to. When the new Planning Commission is sworn in, that's when I'm going to have to speak in other categories. And I don't want to run the risk of getting into attorney turf. Because to us, this is a life or death survival issue. And I'm absolutely serious on this point. And again, since 1960, we have been very self-sufficient, very self-contained. And if it ain't broke, let's not try to fix it. Because everything is 50-50, it seems like, in our civilization. I don't care if it's, whatever the issue, marriage, marijuana, the border, whatever it is. Half the people in this town are tourism NIMBYs. The problem with that is several hundred of whom are proactive in their campaigns against tourism. The half that like tourism are more passive. So the problem is they come in here as tourists, they like the area, and they want to close the door behind themselves. Now, how hypocritical is that? And that's what I fear the most here, are the tourism-hating NIMBYs. Anyway, it's part of the reason our real estate values are so high is because of these tourists. I don't care if it's Monterey, Santa Cruz, Sausalito, et cetera, et cetera. If you don't have tourism, your property value. And that's another thing I disappreciate about LAFCO. They said in 1991, again in 1993, and again only a couple of months ago. He says, you should want LAFCO involved because your property values will go up. Well, wait a second. Where does it say in your charter that's what you're supposed to do to entice people? But wherever LAFCO goes, and I saw the list of the original charter reasons why LAFCO was created in 1963. It was, to prevent urban sprawl, otherwise known as, oligopolies, I think the term is. And it's had the ironic effect of doing exactly the opposite. Because wherever LAFCO goes, urban sprawl follows. Remember that. Thank you for your ear. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Good seeing you again, Mr. Barnett.
Wait, Mr. Frank, can I ask you a question, please?
Yes, ma'am.
I love Traintown. I have Traintown tickets in my wallet right now.
No
Though your roller coaster scares the heck out of me, but I go on it with my 6-year-old nephew. Love Traintown. What I don't understand, and I need you to educate me, what is the downside to Traintown being annexed by the city of Sonoma? Is there a fiscal implication?
No.
What is the loss for you if you're annexed by the city of Sonoma?
Well, you have noise ordinances, you have livestock ordinances. We paint the front of our business in prototypical railroad colors, bright reds, bright yellows. And the reason railway equipment is painted that way is so the public can see the railway movements, and so other railway movements can see other railway movements. Might have to be, they can even control your hours off. I said, in the case of our petting zoo, because of your livestock ordinances, if one animal expires, can we replace that animal? Or is it a demise, animal by animal? And they couldn't answer that question. You know, we have a neighboring business that makes far more noise than we do every day, from shortly after sunup until the end of the business day. Nobody ever complains about them because the NIMBY, it's just like one of your city staffers said. He said, you are an amusement park, therefore you are an easy political target. And that's why the Marriotts got out of the city of Santa Clara. That's why the Wrigley's got out of Pasadena. That's why the Bush family of Anheuser-Busch fame terminated their public operations in St. Louis. And even Disney, when they moved to Florida, they wanted their own county, their whole self-contained county, because they got sick and tired of butting heads with the city of Anaheim and the county of Orange. And, I mean, we are already encountering NIMBY problems, and we haven't even been annexed yet. So anyway, do you want me to speak more on this topic, or does that good enough?
Well, no, I think you've hit on some key points, and I know the livestock one is a big issue. I'm a horse owner. I don't live in the city limits. I live in the outside area. So that raises some questions, and I think I have more questions for the staff on that, because obviously you're one of those businesses that is a tourist destination, but also us locals love it. So we don't want to see that change. I'm just trying to understand where we cause suffering for you if we were to annex the property. I just need to get educated.
I really don't want to step on my attorney's turf, but I could read you part of a paragraph, a part of a letter. In fact, in case you didn't know, I objected to this inflammatory language that Traintown should be annexed without hesitation, that we should be first on the hit list. I considered that inflammatory. And I pursued legal counsel on if that was even a legitimate thing to say. And as it turned out, it wasn't. So they rewrote the LAFCO report. Were you informed of any of this? Because there was the one that was submitted last May. It made the newspaper. It was in the newspaper. And then they rewrote it and they resubmitted it. You would know that, Mr. Storer. See, he knows. He knows. They had to tone it down. So anyway, do you want me to read the LAFCO?
Does it address her question as far as?
Would you like me to read the LAFCO letter?
I would.
Because it caused a republishing and resubmittal of the Municipal Services Report. And then this goes back to July 6th. It was right in the County Supervisor's Chamber, and I wrote, Robert Frank here, and I hail from Sonoma Traintown Railroad, which is nothing less than the finest Garden State Railway, public or private, on our planet. Ongoing at 20264 Broadway, Sonoma, since my father, Stanley Frank, founded Traintown over 64 years ago, because certain models go back to 1958. I must say we resisted LAFCO recommended city annexation in 1993 and again in 1999. Had we not resisted those 29 and 23 years ago, Traintown's 2,000 plus trees and several acres of ponds, which qualify as green space, would have since been destroyed and flattened, ill thanks to LAFCO's urban sprawl. I don't care what their founding message is. The reality is something 180 degrees opposite today. Otherwise, I'm sure most people welcome LAFCO because annexation increases real estate wealth. This is what LAFCO told us in 1993 and 1999 and again a few weeks ago prior to this July 6th speech. My wife and I and our 3 daughters are disinterested in this financial incentive. We at Traintown are also disinterested in annexation, especially in the city of Sonoma, which is at least 50% populated by tourist NIMBYs, hundreds of whom are proactive in their campaigns against tourism. Today, after Traintown's 64 years of none problems relating to water supply, sewage, drainage, garbage, security, fire, the city of Sonoma will nonetheless be encouraged by LAFCO to, and I quote, to annex Traintown without hesitation, that Traintown should be first on the hit list, end quote. Where does this inflammatory and aggressive language come from? I'm sorry to say it comes from LAFCO, and they admit it. On this biased basis alone, LAFCO should recuse itself from this so-called annexation recommendation, and our law firm, Perry, Johnson, Anderson, Miller, and Moskowitz, agrees. Now, try not to be offended here, but I'm speaking what I think is the truth. In the city of Sonoma, where they like to say, to annex is to control, in a city which is considering the use of silent fireworks will only lead to silent trains and silenced children. In addition to city noise ordinances, let's not forget city livestock ordinances. Forbidden use of creosoted railway lumber, which is critical to any railway's economies, by the way. Possible fence ponds, possible armed security, possible $1 million duck ponds that spill over into sewage treatment, barred use of bright prototypical railway colors, and the demand that Traintown provide more parking for certain of our city business neighbors who have no parking of their own at all. Just as bad as the city requirement to apply for building permits each and every time we need to replace pre-existing hardwired tools, pumps, motors, and appliances, even water heaters. Who knows what the city of Sonoma will dream up next, and we haven't even been annexed yet. Sonoma city staff is short-handed and can't return phone calls or emails in a timely way. Permitting processes can take years. For minor construction alterations, our maintenance efficiency will go down and take our safety down with it, where public safety is profoundly paramount at Traintown. As you might possibly appreciate, a 500,000 square foot living, breathing work of outdoor art can't coexist in such strangulation. Perhaps this is the ill hope at some subconscious level amongst NIMBYs, which we all need to recognize. Final paragraph. And thank you for what is probably now about 9 minutes, Mr. Wallander. Bless your heart.
No more questions.
Okay, here we go. Final paragraph. And I went to high school with Ray Mullis, by the way. In conclusion, the one sensible thing LAFCO said in 93 and 99 and a few days ago is that city annexation will enable city firemen to respond more quickly. We say this: it's one thing to be partially destroyed by fire due to a slightly more tardy Shell Vista fire truck. Quite another to be completely flattened and destroyed by Caterpillar tractors due to LAFCO-induced urban sprawl. We would rather take our chances with the good people of the Shell Vista Fire Department. That way, Traintown will stand a much better chance of surviving the next 64 years, instead of being gobbled up by certain outside investors of late, who have left a trail of blight by whatever real estate they have bought. Thank you for the speaking privilege, and please remember, if it ain't broke, please don't try to fix it. Anyway, that's about it. Boy, it takes lung power, I'm telling you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to come up and speak to the topic of the MSR?
We do have a member of the public that would like to speak on Zoom. Fred Alabak, you can go ahead and speak.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair Welander, members of the Planning Commission. I'm glad to see that I've finally got unlimited minutes to just carry forward and say whatever I'd like.
You're being presumptuous, Fred.
I have a couple of things that I would like to say, particularly regarding the LAFCO MSR recommendation 11.1, which is to the city consider expanding its sphere of influence and annexing parts of the already urban and developed areas. That Sonoma Valley is the only place in Sonoma County besides Moreland where the low-income community of interest is externalized from the city. It's the only one in the whole county. And if you took the urbanized area of Sonoma Valley, it would be the fourth largest city in the county. So when the Planning Commission does do its future analysis of this recommendation 11.1, like you take into account those points, and also SB 244, which is a state law that's germane to this process, and that LAFCO also requires, and now analyzing in terms of annexation, that there's communities of interest involved. And there most certainly is a community of interest there in the what I'll call the Springs Urban Service Area of low-income Latino community. And SB 244 requires you to analyze a DUC, or a disadvantaged unincorporated community, related to community of interest. And so with your analysis, that would take into account various Springs tracts and block groups that go all the way up to Eldridge and Madrone Road. And then there's also lots of other studies that you can look at, like the Portrait of Sonoma County, the HDI Index, Sonoma Valley Collaborative Study, Generation Housing, Hidden in Plain Sight. There's all sorts of studies that you can look to that analyze the valley situation here. So when you get to that, please take into account those considerations. And now I'd like to ask the planning director on another tack here. The planning director Storr may recall that when the potential 285 Napa Road parcel, which was neither in the sphere or in the UGB, came up for potential inclusion in the city, I asked the planning director if there was a path to do that. He said, yes, there was a path. It might not have been the most probable path, but it was possible. Then the whole UGB thing came along, and in my opinion, the UGB language was designed specifically to defeat situations like 285 Napa Road with the language in the UGB that basically makes it impossible to annex anything. So I would like to ask the planning director if there's any hypothetical parcels that would be analogous to 285 Napa Road, contiguous to the city, that could possibly come under consideration like that 285 Napa Road parcel. And then this also leads and is related to the city council sending back to the planning commission request to look at quadruplexes and multifamily housing in single-family zoned areas that in the city are 65% of residential zoning is the RL zoning. And so with the UGB and the strictness of it, that it was brought up by Councilmember Lowe that people want dense infill, and lots of space in the city, can't annex outside the UGB if there's any vacant or underutilized land in the city. And so this leads back to the this annexation stuff of the underutilized space of the 65% of RL zoning in the city, which is quite a bit of underutilized space.
Fred, you're being unfair to Mr. Storr. You're asking him a question and not giving him a chance to answer with a second one.
Finish up just real quick, and he'll be able to remember my question. Just 30 more seconds, Ron.
All right, go ahead.
Apropos of the underutilized vacant land in the city is the Armstrong Estates, which has a requirement of 20,000 square feet minimum lot size for a single family house. That just does not seem right. So this gets to the housing element and the site inventory, et cetera, but that's just sort of following a train of thought there about the UGB and underutilized space. But I would like to ask the planning director about that 285 Napa Road, and there was a path to that, and is there a path to any more like that that you see on parcels adjacent to the city?
Mr. Storer, would you like to take a shot at that?
Fred's got another 15 minutes, so are you going to give it to him now or later? Mr. Chair, if I can, there's comments I want to respond to Mr. Frank and also to Fred. So when you've finished your public testimony, then I'll respond.
Okay, Fred, hang on there. Do we have anybody else that would like to come up on Zoom or in the audience?
No one on Zoom.
Okay, with that, I will then give it back to the director to comment on either Mr. Frank's comments as well as Mr. Auerbach's comments.
And you're closing the public component at this point?
Yeah, it's implied. Yes, I'm closing it.
Thank you. All right, so I promise I won't take 20 minutes in responding, but the first question, I think, was the language relative to Mr. Frank on the two versions of the draft. You had one, I believe it was in March, and then a modified one in August, which is the one that was approved by LAFCO on September the 7th.
Move your mic closer.
Oh, sorry. So there was language changes, and I'd just like to read it out, just so you can kind of get a taste for what Mr. Frank was talking about. And again, this is certainly within the purview of the preparer and the approvers of the MSR. Again, we're receiving that information based on this independent analysis and the modification through public testimony of the language. So originally, the language, as Mr. Frank said, was 11.4. The city should not hesitate to apply to LAFCO to annex the Traintown unincorporated island. And then it goes on to say that the city could request the annexation under the island annexation provisions in CKH, the Cortese-Knox-Hertzberg law. So the city should not hesitate was modified to the city should engage in discussions with the owners of Traintown, which constitutes an unincorporated island wholly surrounded by the city, seeking agreement to annex the island. It doesn't say that there isn't an island. It's just saying there's a different approach, whether the city should use the provision of the statute to even enforce an annexation, if you will, because there is a speedy or a fast-track process, even if there is a protest. So that's the language difference between the two. And then with respect to the ducks, Fred was throwing an acronym out there, disadvantaged unincorporated community. And in the version that was approved by LAFCO, there's a map, Exhibit 4-1, and it actually has a duck, a disadvantaged unincorporated community, within our city limits, which is contrary to the definition of an unincorporated area of territory that doesn't meet certain household income requirements. It does not show any duck, disadvantaged unincorporated community, anywhere up the Highway 12. There's maybe a little piece around Boys Hot Springs on the west side of 12. But the point is still true that Mr. Alabak mentioned, that we go through that analysis. We're required to by law, or at least, LAFCO is required to, as there's a request or a petition from a local agency to annex territory. As far as properties, in this case, we know that the property that's being referred to was put on the market. It was so far away from our UGB, it would have required an extension of the UGB to get out there. So are there properties near our UGB or closer to it than that one that was referenced? Yes. But I think LAFCO's policy, again, would be to have orderly growth. And how far you extend the UGB in order to meet that criterion. In the UGB language, and again, I'm going to apologize ahead of time, the goal was, if there are amendments to the UGB, let's do it for the purposes of 100% affordable housing projects. That was the general consensus, and I'm happy to stand corrected on that.
All right.
I'm not sure where we are here in this process.
We're going to bring it back.
We're
and
not taking action.
We're not taking action. We're just having a robust discussion.
Okay.
And I will say before we continue, I do take exception to staff's reference to us being lame. I don't want to consider any personal.
It was lame ducks, DUCs.
I understand that, but we're still giving of our time to the city and I don't want to be categorized as lame. So please.
Well, it's kind of it's hard to know where to start, and I certainly, the last thing I want is to evoke Mr. Frank getting up and talking anymore. So he's had plenty of time to talk. You'll have ample opportunities in the future, but what I'd like to suggest are some talking points for another day. Okay, I think the parking issue needs to be looked at. And I would be interested in knowing how many people you are getting at Traintown now versus in the past before there was a parking problem. Do you have increased numbers of users or not? If you do, then I think that tends to think, people have to drive there. I mean, except for the few people that might walk there, which are few and far between. But I think that we ought to look at the intensity of use. If it's gone up, it's fair to assume that your parking demands have gone up. Okay, just a point, come back to it when you have hard data. The other point is, I've lived here most of my life. I grew up here, I graduated from high school, I grew up here, raised my kids here, my grandchildren come back here. They love to go to Traintown. Nobody up here wants to get rid of Traintown. I think you've got this bugaboo about annexation that is just illogical. Nobody wants to see condominiums or subdivisions there. We like Traintown. So I don't know why this has to be the devil in your mind, because it's not. We don't intend it to do that. We don't have any intention of doing that. But we do want to have an orderly administration of our city, an orderly management of our city. People have brought up issues that might benefit by this being part of the city. Maybe not. It's a topic for future consideration, but I just...
have answers to all that.
Okay, calling people NIMBYs is a non-starter. That's not going to get you anywhere, certainly not going to be convincing. Okay, that's my thought, that's my comments.
Mr.
But
Chair,
I think people like Traintown. I think you're misreading the whole LAFCO thing. So that's my comment about that.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Barbosa reminded me of something I wanted to say earlier, and that devolves around the concept of pre-zoning. We clearly in the city limits do not have a zoning called Traintown or anything close to it. And the principle that you just mentioned, Commissioner Barbosa, is such that should there be a desire on Traintown to want to come into our city, we would say, you're going to be staying there forever as you are. We want to give you a use permit or the zoning that allows you to replace a chicken, and I'm being facetious here, or a horse. I don't know the livestock on the property. And the number of trains, the Ferris wheel, the amusements. The goal would be to have it stay in situ and operate as it has for years. There would be no intention. And that can be done with the pre-zoning concept to allow these uses to remain there indefinitely. And that, I'm sorry for not bringing that up earlier.
And one other thing I'd just like to add. Sebastiani Winery was a tourist attraction of some great long-standing use and was very successful until quite recently. And it did operate within the city. That's
Mr. Chair, I was going to say, I think Commissioner Barbosa, just to help provide clarification, we are here as a scheduled presentation tonight. This is a matter that will at some point in the future be discussed by a planning commission at a point when it's determined by the director or city manager that we return to your commission because the council has asked for your input as a commission, and that seems to be most appropriate to do that in the first quarter of next year or some other time period that is warranted.
I just have a question. This might be an unpopular question, or it might be not be an appropriate question, but nonetheless, as part of annexations and looking at county versus city, who controls what is the policy, if at all, or the power, if at all, that the county or the city has in terms of eminent domain, in terms of going forward and taking a property for a public benefit, say building high density, very affordable housing? Does the city have that authority, or the council? I don't believe we do. And does the county have that?
I'm not aware of a government entity that doesn't have the power of eminent domain. The applicability is the problem part of it, as to whether there's a public purpose that transcends the need of the private landowner to do what they need to do or want to do. We have that power of eminent domain.
Is that ever looked at when we're looking at annexations to land for incorporation?
I've not seen it done. Typically, again, there's two ways to get to LAFCO. A jurisdiction will take an application, as in the case we would have done with Doyle, or a property owner will go directly to LAFCO and seek annexation in this case. Very rarely done through the property owner initiative. It's usually done through a municipality. LAFCOs want to know whether a government agency is going to be able to support the operation of that land.
Thank you.
Mr. Barnett.
Thank you. Mr. Frank, it's been a while.
23 years to the month.
How many?
23 to the month.
I'm getting old.
You haven't changed.
The subject that we're touching on tonight, and obviously this is not a decision-making meeting, we're just having a conversation, was placed on that agenda those years ago by Councilman then Ramponi. And my recollection is that you expressed, as you have tonight, a very strong opinion as to your preference to the future. And the net effect of the discussion that night on the council's part was to take no action whatsoever. And that's exactly what's happened. I think from my perspective, the future of Traintown and the destiny of it has been and remains entirely in your family's hands. For example, if it were the choice of your grandchildren one day, for whatever the reason might be, could be taxes, inheritance, disputes among the various family members as to how to deal with this property, it would be at this point within their sole discretion as to whether to continue it as a business or to sell off the land for development by some other entity. That's not something the city can now control, or under any circumstance that I can imagine, other than some strange zoning limitation that would require the parcel to continue to operate as an amusement park ad infinitum. In other words, it was zoned as a train town facility, and that's the only use that it could have. I don't think that would stand up. I'm not a lawyer. I don't think that would stand up in a court of law. I don't think the city could do that. So the vulnerability of Traintown, I think, is really up to your family. And I sincerely hope, because I've raised my kids and my grandkids going to Traintown, is really something that your family has and will continue to control. You expressed very strongly those years ago of no interest in being incorporated into the city. It appears that that is still your point of view. The council respected that, and I'm not on the council, I'm just on the lowly planning commission. The council respected that feeling of yours then, and should you or subsequent generations of the Frank family continue to have that opinion, I don't know why the city would feel at this point a compelling interest, but I'm just speaking as a planning commissioner, a compelling interest to wrest some level of control over the future destiny of this property by annexing it, if it were not your decision, and to do so. I just can't imagine that scenario with any future council, but I can't speak for them. What I do know is that should your family decide to change gears and throw your hands in the air and say, we're tired of it, it's been great, we're ready to move on and move to some other location and make a big profit if we can, that's always in the cards. It would be a challenge for the city to face up to that reality and all of a sudden find a development application for your many acres there by someone who wants to use the property for a different use, and I'm sure it would stimulate a hell of a conversation.
Demolition costs would be prohibitive.
Yeah, whatever it would be. I think my personal opinion is that annexations, even if they're permitted by LAFCO, to be preemptory on the part of the city, really are not a good idea unless the property owners are in favor of it. And that's the position I held years ago, and I continue to hold today.
You bring back so many memories, because my mother was a very advanced age, and they wanted to, it was commercial gateway zoning, to use the correct nomenclature.
And it still is.
And, no, it's not. It is, Mr. Storer will, no, it's not that at all.
Ah, okay.
It's oak,
Let's-
reserve or something.
Let's go ahead and bring it back here. And Mr. Willers, do you have any thoughts?
Well, LAFCO's Traintown's the elephant in the room, but I'm not going to speak to Traintown because I think the issues that are brought up in the MSR are better served to talk about them generically as in the context of our city. I do agree with Mr. Frank that LAFCO essentially is urban sprawl, even though it talks against urban sprawl. And it does that in a way that it encourages city to go into their sphere of influence, annex land, grab it, develop it, bring it to a higher value, and then says, oh, by the way, you need more land in your sphere of influence. And that process I've lived through. I've been unfortunate enough to live long enough to live through urban sprawl. I live here because we don't do that. And the communities that do that in many ways have lost their soul, in my opinion. Our urban growth boundary, while is the subject of a lot of controversy, is one that says we have a certain identity. We can live with that identity. We can live within the construct of the urban growth boundary. As a community, we say we want to grow within rather than without because we see the value of that. And annexing land without a reason other than LAFCO saying maybe you should think about it, I think runs contrary to the urban growth boundary, certainly. And unless there's a valid reason to bring land into our community and not look to utilize the land within the community better, we shouldn't be doing it just because LAFCO says, well, you might want to think about it. So that's my opinion about the MSR is, we ought to take due diligence to look and see how we're going to use the land within the current urban growth boundary and within the current city limits, allow the sphere of influence to be what it is, and let LAFCO make its recommendations.
Thank you. Sure.
I promise to be quick, and I promise not to ask Mr. Frank any questions. I think that this is a really good process, actually, and I think it's important to identify those areas that could be annexed and should be annexed, and there's definitely some here that totally make sense, but obviously we should only approach them when the property owners want to be annexed, and if there's a reason that they don't want to be annexed, I think we should honor that. Thank you.
Mr. McDonald, any more comments?
I don't have any further questions. Thank you.
Okay, I was told that we have to quit by 8, so I'm going to keep it short. I would like to go ahead and let's throw out the idea that we do this kind of review on a shorter than a 13-year cycle, because I think there's some rich conversation we've had about the whole idea of who we are, what we are, where we stand, and including the discussions about annexation. And I love the fact that we are not compelled to respond or to take the recommendations from LAFCO. I also want at this time to caution us when we look at the attraction of Maxwell Park and Montini property. Those are great pieces of landscape, but we're challenged right now maintaining our current parks, and I just cannot imagine us taking on Maxwell and wanting to maintain it to a level that we can be proud of. So I would like to simply throw out that the idea of us getting a report maybe every 10 years, but not the way it has been, because again, I think if nothing else, we've had good discussion both up here as well as from the audience, and I think there's value that makes us think about our community, how we're structured, what the fabric looks like, what we value, and now how can we keep it. So with that, I'm going to stop talking. Yes, Mr. Director.
Okay, I won't tell you. One thing that I did forget to mention, I apologize. On the chart that I showed you of the membership composition, there is an opportunity in short order where we can actually have or request to be on LAFCO as a member of our city council, and the city council did select council member Sandra Lowe to apply to be on that the rotation of the city membership. So that could certainly be, if we have a 4-year appointment, for example, if we're successful, then that could be something that our representative could encourage. LAFCO is supposed to be doing these service reviews periodically. If I said every 5 years, that would be awesome. Rarely done. But for example, they could do that for all of the districts. Let's say there's 20 districts within LAFCO, 5 water districts. They're supposed to be going through a routine process every 5 years to get those things updated. But I think having membership on the commission would be a worthwhile thing for our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we are closing number 9 and we're moving on to item number 10, which is simply comments from the commission. Yes, Mr. Willers.
Comment, it's actually a question of staff, and that is that the Planning Commission received an email from Allison O'Donnell regarding her property, or the family's property on Sonoma Highway. And the nature of the email was, reconsider qualifying this as a historic property. I think that her email deserves a response, not necessarily from each one of us, but probably from the city, and that is that we really don't designate them, that, the state designates them if they're can be designated as historic properties. But that, these properties are over 50 years old, the buildings that are on there, and fall into that category of a historic structure just by default, so.
Thank you. Without getting too far into a discussion on that topic, we are in the process of evaluating properties for inclusion on the city's local inventory of historic places. That is one, and of the 10 that we're looking at, and then an additional 20, we'll be in contact with property owners to see if there's an interest on their part to be in or on that list or not. In the case of it happening on the state list, anything that's on the national and state list is on our local, gets added by default to our local list. So we are in that process. We hope, I believe, and I'll ask Christina, I think we're looking for the December meeting, Christina?
I'm right here.
Oh, there you go.
She snuck up on me.
I'm not going to comment on the December meeting or not, but we have had conversations with the member of the public and shared the historic resource evaluation, went over that specific process that it already is a historic structure. We have the historic resource evaluation, and that putting it on the list, it's really just a way of clarifying it for all current and future property owners and what the rules and regulations are.
Mr. Barnett.
Question for Mr. Storr. Are you going to be in attendance at our next Planning Commission meeting?
It depends if the interim director wants me to be here. No, yes, I will, sir.
You will be?
Yes, sir.
Okay, then I will reserve my remarks for that.
Thank you.
All right, anything else?
I do just want to check with my fellow commissioners about attending the November 17th meeting because I may not be available, and I just want to make sure you've got a quorum.
I'll be here.
Probably.
Thanks.
Mr. Chair, if I can, I actually do have some issues updates. I'm not quite sure. It seemed like I used to have a place where I could.
You're not there yet. You're not there. So, no updates, just comments. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, Wendy's going to hand something out, and I'll explain that after I've made a couple of other comments regarding some timely matters. Earlier this week, we released the downtown parking management plan that was requested by our council to do so for a 30-day public review. At some point in the first quarter, we'll come to your commission and have a discussion on that topic. Actually, I just lied. November 17th, we're coming to your commission for a discussion on that project, on that draft plan. The council did receive a presentation, about 2 months ago, by our consultant doing the downtown parking management plan. So that product is out there. It's on our webpage, and the public is encouraged to look at it as you are as a commission. We'll come to you as a commission and seek your recommendations on the timing and the implementation of some of the recommendations in that report. And so the council will actually consider your recommendations on the implementation in the first quarter. So I apologize for that brain mix-up. Secondly, on Tuesday of this week, the county issued the final EIR on the specific plan for the Sonoma Developmental Center. They have a county planning commission meeting on October the 27th at 1:05 p.m. The evening before, the Sonoma Valley Citizens Advisory Committee will also have a discussion at 6:30 p.m. that evening on that very same final impact report. And then, for some reason, at 5 o'clock on the 26th, an hour and a half before the CAC has their meeting, that's when comments are supposed to be responded to the county. Let me just explain very quickly what a draft EIR is and a final EIR. The draft EIR is that 1,000-page document that we received where they talk about all of the impacts of the proposed development of the developmental center. And the final EIR is responding to all of the letters that the county received regarding that 1,000-page document. So the final EIR is not a complete rewrite of that 1,000-page document. It's a response to all of the 240 letters that they received, and just that, a response to comments document that when you sandwich together, that becomes the EIR. This final EIR has our letter that our mayor sent to the county, and we have yet to review how they responded to our response to the EIR, the draft EIR. So I wanted to kind of put that information out there to the public and also to bring that to your attention. That concludes my comments, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
What's this?
Sorry. Getting old. Yeah, it's my attempt to show you just a quick survey. This is with respect to the housing elements that have been submitted from the ABAG community. So if you see something in yellow, that means they have submitted their 6th cycle housing element to HCD. So those that are not colored, as in the city of Sonoma, and we think we're hours away, right, Wendy? To being on this list of 58. This was just done earlier this week. So basically 50% of ABAG's 109 jurisdictions have actually submitted to HCD. Those that are in the red, 10 of them, have received their letters back from HCD, providing HCD's response to that element that was drafted and submitted. There are some jurisdictions here that have actually got approved. There may be one or two on this list in red that have actually got approved certified housing elements, but I don't know if that's really the message that I was trying to send here, other than the fact that we're perilously close to submitting ours to begin the 90-day review that HCD has allowed under the law. So that was just more of an FYI.
Thank you. Mr. Barnett.
Question on that, David. I know that the city received a variety of responses to our draft of the housing element, and did that result in changes of the language within that element that's being submitted to HCD?
Yes, certainly. And one thing I do, thank you for reminding me of that. I'd like the public to know that we'll always receive comments on any version that we have, especially even the one that we send to HCD. right up until the date that the council actually adopts the housing element. Because what happens is we actually have to have we're required to have a public review period, and then we respond to those comments, and then package them, respond to them, send them to HCD to do its does it comply with law review. And so, yes, we did make some modifications to the public draft. Wendy is our project manager on that, along with our consultant, and we're in hopefully the last minutes of getting the fine language prepared and sent to HCD. So we've made some changes. We're not sending it back out for another 30-day review. We need to get HCD's look at it to tell us if we're complying with law. The thing to remember about HCD's review is once we've responded to their letter, we can certainly take it to our council for adoption. And then assuming that we've done a yeoman's effort and responded to their comments, got it adopted by our council, with a good piece of luck, it's going to get certified by HCD. Not always guaranteed, but we can certainly hope that they actually certify it, because once they certify it, there's a preponderance that it complies with. It complies with law. It's presumptively valid that it complies with law once they've certified it. A presumption of validity. There we go. That was a string of words I wanted to get out of my head. And so, yeah, thank you. We'll get it out there.
Okay, and when you submit that to HCD, is it that going to be then posted in its revised form on the city website?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. So of these cities that, municipalities that have provided their housing plan, what's your guess on how many of these are actually going to get rejected?
They don't get rejected. They get a longer letter than everybody else. So we have bets internally that, it's going to be 10 pages or 15 pages. I know of a 28-page letter that went to a jurisdiction that begins with the letter O and has A-K-A-L-M-D in it as well.
Well, I know that
Not necessarily in that order.
the city
probably.
of Atherton, their plan is counting on 80% of that housing coming from ADUs, which you pretty much expect that to get a long letter.
Well, it depends. If they have a history and can show that that's a normal average for them, then yes. In ours, for example, I think we popped at 8 a year for the next 8 years. Folks, that's 64 out of our 315 right there. It's when you say, I've got 42 ADUs a year, when you've never done it, that's when they're going to not pass the giggle test. But yeah, I mean, if they've got a history of doing that, if they don't, and the same with SB9 units, we get to say how many SB9 units over the next 8 years we think is going to come along.
Okay, anyone else? I'm taking now short questions. None? Okay. Well, then I would love to entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Done. Thank you.